Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. Yesterday, I almost doubled my time, which means I could only give you a few seconds today to make up that time that I took from you. But I'm telling myself that all those free days you got off over the holiday, that's giving me some money in the bank with your time. I know that's not true. Yesterday, we talked about slavery. We're still continuing our study of the life and letters of the Apostle Peter. And we're in First Peter. We finished up chapter 2 yesterday and talked about slavery and talked about how difficult this is and how harshly it falls on our 21st century ears. And chapter 3 can do that as well, verses 1 through 7. If we don't listen well. So this is the larger portion of the letter where Peter is telling them how they're going to have to get ready for the coming persecution, for the persecution that they're already suffering. It's already taking their lives. It has already taken Paul's life, and that will soon take his. And so he's saying you got to get your moral house in order, and you got to get your relationships right, not just with God, but with each other and with the people around you and with the governmental authorities over you. So in chapter 3, verses 1 through 7, we have his comments about the home and the relationship between husbands and wives. And so Paul has already done this twice. He's done it in Colossians, and he's done it in Colossians and in Ephesians. Colossians 3, Ephesians 5, Ephesians chapter 5. He covers all this ground. This kind of a thing is called a house tafel, house orders, the orders of a happy, harmonious home. And any moral or philosophical writer who put pen to papyrus back in the early centuries and in those centuries, those late centuries BC as well, has written one. And Paul writes too, and this is Peter's. In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior. And let not your adornment be external, braiding the hair, wearing gold jewelry, and putting on dresses, but let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the imperishable quality of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is precious in the sight of God. For in this way, in former times, the holy women also, who hoped in God, used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands. Thus, Abraham obeyed Sarah, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. You husbands likewise live with your wives in an understanding way, since she is a weaker vessel, as with a weaker vessel, since she is a woman, and grant her honor as a fellow heir in the grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. One way to read this is to read it as reinforcing patriarchy. Wives, call your husbands Lord. Dress in drab colors. Be quiet. Don't ever say anything. That's not the way to read this passage. That's just not what he's saying. That's only what he's saying because we don't listen well, and we have prejudices already about the word that we've been taught to have by our current culture. Submission is not obedience. Submission takes place between two people when one has assumed the mantle of leadership. And Paul has already defined leadership in the home not as being a martinet or ordering people around, but as sacrificing yourself and serving the people in your family. Read Ephesians 5 and Colossians 3, and you'll see that that's true. And Peter is doing the same thing. He's writing to wives whose husbands may not be Christians, and he said the main thing is to bring them to the Lord. And the way to do that is to be a loving, calm, respectful person, a person whose value is internal. Without mentioning Ruth, he really calls us back to Ruth. Boaz loved Ruth, and he tells us why, because of the person she is inside. And he says, you should be loved because of the person you are on the inside, not because of externals. And he's not saying don't wear jewelry. If he's saying that, he's saying don't wear dresses. And I'm sure most men would vote for that, But that's not what he's saying at all. You can't be saying that. He's saying your value doesn't lie in external things, in the things that you wear, in your makeup, in your jewelry, in your clothing. Your value lies on who you are on the inside. And then he says, be like Sarah. Now, is he ignorant of the book of Genesis? I mean, who is Sarah? Who is the Sarah that we know? This is a woman who speaks her mind and gets her way most of the time. The one time she yielded that we read about to Abraham, other than leaving, which doesn't make a lot of sense to a wife who is enjoying a wealthy lifestyle, of course, and she followed her husband because God told him to move. The one time that she calls him Lord is when God came and said, you're going to have a baby next year. I know you're going to be 100 next year, Abraham, and Sarah's going to be 90, but next year you're going to have a child. And she laughs and she says, will my Lord give me pleasure now that he is old, now that I am old? This is a joke at his expense. Sarah laughs at the whole notion that at 100, at 99 and 89, they're going to make a baby. And yet she did. Did she not yield to the spiritual leadership of her husband and have a child when she was 90 years old? That's what this is about. This is about valuing yourself for what's inside, not on what society tells you makes you valuable, those things that are on the outside. And if your husband thinks that, then show him otherwise. Show him by the woman that you are, your strength, your intelligence, your good life, that that's truly valuable. And he won't see otherwise. He may not see even then, but that's the only chance that you have. Expect leadership out of your husband, and when that leadership is shown, follow that leadership. Expect him to be the man God expects him to be and the man that you want him to be. And then when he is, follow that leadership the way Sarah did. And then to husbands, the weaker vessel. He's talking about, as Paul used the word vessel in the Thessalonian correspondence, your physical body. Most men are physically stronger than most women their age. Okay? They just are. And this is an admission of that. And he's saying, listen, live with your wives in an understanding way. Figure your wives out. Pay attention to your wives. Understand your wives. And respect the fact that you're a man and that you're stronger than she is. You better not in any way violate her physically. Don't do that. It will it will affect your relationship with God. Paul talks about, abstaining from sex for a little while, the two of you, so that you can have some time for prayer, but don't make that very long. When Peter talks about your prayers being hindered, he's applying that to your entire relationship with your wife. There's an old saying, happy wife, happy life, which is true. But he's saying if your relationship with your wife isn't right, your relationship with God is not going to be right either. So get it right. He's telling that to husbands. I hope none of us object to any of that. If we do, we're objecting to the Word of God. I've taken more than 8 minutes of your time again. Thank you for indulging me a few extra moments. We'll see you tomorrow. We're going to pick up with verse 8. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes.